Okay, so here we are. This is episode 10. Pretty sure it's 10. It's all kind of blurring together here. Anyway, this past week sucked. I got a chunk of my finger pulled out by some pliers by my fumble fingers. Trying to do something. I forget what I was doing, but I pulled a chunk out of my finger and it bled real nice, and then it got infected. So that was my week, and it pretty much killed everything I was working on. Went to the doctor, he said don't use it. So couldn't do anything really. Couldn't play my guitar, that's for sure. But it's the swelling has gone down, and it's healing pretty good. So anyway, and then so the new computer showed up. So I'm migrating from a 4 or 5 year old Mac OS up to Big Sur, and then I had to migrate the complete operating system and all the files and everything into the new 24-inch M1 iMac, which theoretically is going to make doing these videos a little quicker. I just got up and my mouth isn't working right now, so so this is, again, I tried to make this pretty quick, short video, and of course it's up over 20 minutes now. So I was going to do like some filler stuff, and then it turned into a project. I did some demos and some information on vintage coil cords. So I have 2 vintage coil cords, one that goes back probably to the 60s, and then another one that's probably a little bit later, maybe early 70s or something. And so I demonstrated those. And really quickly, just to hear the difference in sound and how I measured them, etc., etc., etc. And a little update on the PAF I got last week, and trying to rescue it and restore it. And basically, one coil was dead, and I tried to unwind it, which almost never ever works. I got halfway through it, and it was working pretty well, and then the wire hit undercut under one of the flanges, and it just would not come out without breaking, and it broke, and I quit. So have about half a roll of wire off that pickup, and it will be successfully machine guided, wound, pattern, and restored, and I'll demonstrate that next episode. So I took a lot of photos of the dissecting of that pickup, and how that went and everything. So it won't be totally boring. So anyway, that's it. This is going to be episode 10, and it'll be rendered on the new computer. And actually, I can show you what the new computer setup looks like, and it's kind of cramped, but so there's my big camera over there. Here's the old 27-inch Mac from 2015. I'm keeping it running. I'm going to have both of them running. And here's the new one. And it's a 24-inch, although it's got a pretty darn nice big screen on it, actually. And so this was a chore, cleaning everything up and setting this up and doing all the updating and all that kind of stuff. It was just Macintosh hell week, but hopefully this will speed things up. So the vintage PAF that I showed you last week was dead, and one of the coils survived, but this one didn't. And I tried to save the wire by unwinding it, but the wire was trapped under one of the flanges, and there's no way to get it out or save it, unfortunately. So I did save a fair amount of it, and I'm going to put it back on and then rewind by machine winding pattern. And here's the number of the bobbin mold that you seldom get to see. And here's the end of the number is on the end, and it's a 1 usually. Sometimes it's a 2. So here's how I was unwinding it. I rigged up this thing on my winder to pull the bobbin that I had made a little jig for to unwind it, and but it wouldn't pull endlessly and break the wire. It had a kind of a slip clutch on it that I figured out, and it was actually working pretty good until it broke. And unfortunately, that's what happened. Anyway, I'll give it a try again on the next one that shows up. So here's the base plate of this one is on the bottom, and I noticed that the texture of this late base plate, this is like one of the last PAFs ever made, was really kind of matte and matte finished, and I have one just like it. It's a real late one. In fact, it's a transitional one. And here you see it also has this matte finish to it. So here's a little bit of a close-up on the decal. A little closer. A little difficult to photograph and get it totally in focus, but I've got a pretty decent macro lens. And the old ink is a Nasdar silkscreen gold, and it tends to look a little billowy, embossed kind of a look like you see here. And this is the one that's on mine, the transitional one. Looks like they maybe had changed the paints, or the silk screen was getting clogged. The one on the top is my transitional PAF, so it had the poly wire on it. And the bottom one is this one that I'm restoring. So here's a few photographs of details of the restoration job. Lots of dust, and there was no paper tape over the end. And the way they connected the two wires in the metal was different than some of the other ones, especially the ones that they were taping over. Another view, and you can see where the cable is soldered to the slug. Actually, the slug coil connects to the cable on the hot lead there. A little bit more of dissecting the pickup, the wood shim, and the and the magnet. And another look, you can see the pole keeper there, and the way they deburred them from drilling was by filing in a directional 45-degree angle. And that's a little bit closer look at that. Later on, they punched the holes on T-tops, and it made the bar real ugly looking. So this is the Gauss reading of the magnet. 421 Gauss, 422. Then the other side of the magnet, the negative side. And you move the sensor around, you can get a little higher or lower readings depending on where you are. This is the opposite side, the north side, 425. They're never identical on both sides. Another a little bit closer of the pole keeper. Never really quite figured out how they did this. And here you can see how they chopped off the ends of the pole keeper. Some kind of a scissors kind of cutting machine or something. They weren't cut by a saw. And that's where you see this little ledge where the two halves of the scissoring cut meets. There towards the bottom, a little bit closer. Bunch of junk, steel wool or whatever is grabbed onto the steel. And where the solder joint for the base plate, for the grounding, and then the hot lead. And this is what the surviving coil reads. So it was about 7.6 when it was working. And here I've got the dead coil soaking in solvent. Otherwise you can't get the paper tape off. And here I am removing it under ultraviolet light. And you can also see that it fluoresces under the tape as well, which was kind of interesting. And not much of the green is attached to the adhesive side, which I thought was interesting. This is the coil out of the solvent soaked with all kinds of adhesive goop on it, and pretty ugly mess. You have to clean it up. You get it all over your hands and everything. And another shot. And here it is after the coil has been wiped down and all that adhesive cleaned off. So I was getting it ready to see if I could unwind the wire. And it was, it was a little bit sticky coming off, but I'd keep soaking it again. Here's the bottom. And the replica ones don't look like this. The replica bobbins aren't correct in hardly any way. You can see a little bit of a end flare. And this is kind of a asymmetrical wind, which doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't have any specific sound, as some people claim. The ones with the hype machines. So, another shot. And if you notice the way the ends are, they're a specific way. And here I thought this was a bad solder joint, and I resoldered it. And unfortunately, it was still dead. It looks bad, but it was dead. and it was probably dead from a bad solder joint at the very inside start of the coil. So now we're going to get into vintage guitar cables, specifically coily cords. And when I was a kid, that was just about all you could buy, and they were really popular. And we'd buy the longest ones we could get, or the longest ones we could afford, because the really long ones were pretty expensive. And you notice guys like Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix using those. And the reason was because the long coil cords were like tone capacitors. They trimmed down the treble a lot from your guitar. And even Stevie Ray picked up on that. So here we have this chart I made up showing all the measurements on these three vintage coil cords that I have and these other ones. And this chart shows the 6 cables I'm using here to demonstrate. And I'm not endorsing any cables or anything like that. It's just what I had laying around. But the oldest cable I have is cable number 2. Then the next cable is maybe a little more modern, cable number 3. And an old blue coil cord, which is it's, I don't know when it exactly dates from, but it's somewhere within the 2 first ones. And then I've got a longer cable that's modern, that has orange plugs on it. I threw in there for readings on a modern coil cable that's long and has, like the pure copper stuff that all of them have now. And then I bought this Vox long coil cord too, just to see what it measures and take a listen to that too. And then I threw in a short Fender tweed cable to see what a short cable would read, and to put on this list of specs. So let's look at each cable and then take a listen to each one. I almost forgot to talk about the different kinds of measurements I did. You can just basically measure capacitance, and you can tell which one's going to be a more clear, open sounding guitar cable. So like, for instance, the short tweed cable has really the lowest capacitance of all of them, and it's the brightest sounding, most open sounding one of them all. But there's also inductance involved, so you have to look at that too, and just look at each of the readings on each of them and compare to each other, and then listen to the sound samples I did. And then I did resistance, AC resistance, not DC ohms, AC ohms. So I write that as KAC. So I measured all of those too. So it's a little more complex than just reading, how many picofarads each cable has. So bear that in mind. What you're looking at here is guitar cable number 2. This is the oldest coil cable I have, and it's I'm guessing probably from later 60s, somewhere around there. Got it off of eBay a few years ago. And you can see the braided cable sheath coming out of the main cable, soldered to part of the plug on the left there. And then on the right, you see the hot wire the hot inner core wire coming out, and its insulation is just cheap rubber. So this is a really crude guitar cable, and it has the highest capacitance of all the cables that I'm showing you here. So let's take a listen to it, and then we'll move on to the next cable. This is the next cable. This is old cable number 3, and you're looking at the inner hot core wire. This is a little bit later. It's probably, early 70s, maybe something like that. But the insulation on the inner core wire this time is like some kind of plastic, which is a much better insulator. So this is a little more clear sounding than the old one with the cheap rubber insulation. So let's take a listen to this one. So now this is the old blue coily cord cable. I'm not sure when this dates from. It might be 70s or something like that. I've had it for a long time. And it's actually has a little more capacitance than the second coil cord that we just listened to. So let's take a listen to this one. This is the next cable. This is a modern one. This is a really long one. It's the orange cable. It's a Chromecast, whatever that is. I don't remember anything about this cable, but it's pretty darn long. So let's take a listen to this one. It seems to have the same capacitance as the oldest one, but capacitance isn't everything. You need to look at all the specs. The larger the numbers, the darker the sound. Now this one is the Vox cable. It's about the same length as the Chromecast one. It's really long. It's real overbuilt, heavy, good plugs on it and everything. I'm not sure I really like this one, but take a listen and see what you think. This is a tweed covered guitar cable. It's also the shortest one I threw in just to see what kind of readings it would give in comparison to the others. And it's about 10 feet long, so let's take a listen to that one. More craziness.